2 Kings 24. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylonia, invaded. Jehoiakim became a vassal to him for 3 years, but then he reneged and rebelled against him. Hashem incited against him troops of Chaldeans, troops of Aram, troops of Moab, and troops of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to annihilate it, in accordance with the word of Hashem that he had spoken through his servants the prophets. Indeed, the decree was issued against Judah by the word of Hashem to remove them from his presence, for the sins of Manasseh, for everything that he had done, and also for the innocent blood that he had shed. He had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and Hashem did not want to forgive. The rest of the deeds of Jehoiakim and all that he did, behold, they are recorded in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah. Jehoiakim lay with his forefathers, and his son Jehoiachin reigned in his place. The king of Egypt no longer left his country, for the king of Babylonia had occupied from the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates River all the land that had belonged to the king of Egypt. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Nehushta, daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the eyes of Hashem, like everything that his father had done. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylonia, came up to wage war against Jerusalem, and the city came under siege. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylonia, came upon the city while his servants were besieging it. Jehoiachin, king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylonia, he, his mother, his servants, his ministers, and his officers. And the king of Babylonia took him captive in the 8th year of his reign. He also removed from there all the treasures of the temple of Hashem and the treasures of the king's palace. And he stripped all the gold vessels that Solomon, king of Israel, had made in the sanctuary of Hashem, as Hashem had said. He exiled all of Jerusalem, all the officers and all the men of war, 10,000 exiles, as well as all the artisans and the gatekeepers. There was no one left except for the poorest of the common people. He exiled Jehoiachin to Babylonia, and the king's mother, the king's wives, his officers, and the noblemen of the land he brought into exile from Jerusalem to Babylonia. All of the men of war, 7,000, and the artisans and the gatekeepers, 1,000. All of them mighty men, warriors. The king of Babylonia brought them to exile, to Babylonia. The king of Babylonia then crowned Mattaniah, Jehoiachin's uncle, in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. He did what was evil in the eyes of Hashem, like everything that Jehoiakim had done. It was because the wrath of Hashem was upon Jerusalem and Judah until he would cast them away from his presence that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylonia. 2 Kings 25. It happened in the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylonia, he and his entire army, came to wage war against Jerusalem and encamped near it and built a siege tower around it. The city came under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city became critical. There was no food for the people of the land. The city was breached, and all the men of war fled during the night by way of the gate between the walls, which was near the king's garden, although the Chaldeans were upon the city all around, and the king went into flight by way of the Arabah. The Chaldean army pursued the king and overtook him at the plains of Jericho, and his entire army dispersed from him. They seized the king and brought him up to the king of Babylonia at Riblah, and they chastised him. They slaughtered Zedekiah's sons before his eyes. Nebuchadnezzar blinded Zedekiah's eyes. Then he bound him in copper chains and brought him to Babylonia. In the 5th month, on the 7th of the month, which was the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylonia, Nebuzaradan, the chief executioner, servant of the king of Babylonia, came to Jerusalem. He burned the temple of Hashem, the king's palace, and all the buildings of Jerusalem, and every great house he burned in fire, and the walls of Jerusalem all around. The entire Chaldean army that was with the chief executioner smashed. The remainder of the people who were left in the city and the defectors who had surrendered to the king of Babylonia and the rest of the masses, Nebuzaradan, the chief executioner, sent into exile. But some of the poor people of the land the chief executioner left to be workers in vineyards and in fields. The copper pillars of the temple of Hashem, and the laver stands, and the copper sea that were in the temple of Hashem, the Chaldeans shattered and carried off their copper to Babylonia. The pots, the shovels, the musical instruments, the spoons, and all the copper utensils with which the Kohanim served, they took away. The pans and the bowls, whether of gold or of silver, the chief executioner took away. The 2 pillars, the 1 sea, and the laver stands that Solomon had made for the temple of Hashem. There was no weight with which to measure the copper of all these items. 18 cubits the height of the 1 pillar. There was a copper capital upon it. The height of the capital extended 3 cubits above the pillar. And there were a netting and pomegranate figures upon the capital all around, all of copper. The 2nd pillar had the same ornaments upon the netting. The chief executioner took Sariah the chief Cohen and Zephaniah the deputy Cohen and the 3 gatekeepers. From the city he took 1 officer who was in charge of the men of war, 5 men from those advisers who see the king's face, who were found in the city, the secretary of the commander of the army, who would marshal the common people for war, and 60 men of the common people who were found in the city. Nebuzaradan the chief executioner took them and brought them to the king of Babylonia at Riblah. And the king of Babylonia struck them down and killed them at Riblah, in the land of Hamath. And Judah was exiled from its land. As for the people who remained in the land of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylonia, allowed to remain, he appointed over them Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan. All the officers of the army who were in hiding, they and their men, heard that the king of Babylonia had appointed Gedaliah, and they came to Gedaliah at Mizpah, along with Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, Johanan, son of Kareah, Sariah, son of Tanhumeth, of Netophah, and Jazaniah, son of the Maacathite, they and their men. Gedaliah swore to them and to their men and said to them, "Do not fear the servants of the Chaldeans. Settle in the land and serve the king of Babylonia, and all will be well for you." And it was in the 7th month. There came Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, son of Elishama, who was of the royal family, and with him 10 men. They struck down Gedaliah, and he died, as well as the Jews and the Chaldeans who were with him at Mizpah. All the people, from small to great, as well as the army officers, arose and came to Egypt, for they feared the Chaldeans. It happened in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th of the month, Evil-Merodach, the king of Babylonia, in the year of his coronation, elevated Jehoiachin, king of Judah, and released him from prison. He spoke kindly with him, and set his seat above the seats of the other kings who were with him in Babylonia. He changed from his prison clothing, and he ate his meal before him regularly, all the days of his life. His allowance was a regular allowance given to him from the king, each day's portion on its day, all the days of his life. The decree had been issued by God. Manasseh was so miserable that God did not want to forgive. Now, can you wrap your brain around that? So Nebuchadnezzar attacks the vassal state of Judah, and Egypt does not do anything. And just like Isaiah said, Judah now is in the possession of Babylon. The time has come to wipe Judah off of the face of the earth, and they're going to replace it with absolute destruction and misery. The king of Judah surrenders himself to Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar appoints a king and changes his name. Now, this appointed king rebels because he's crazy or insane or something, but it had to happen. It had to happen, and it happens. And so on the 10th month, on the 10th day, in the 9th year, Nebuchadnezzar lays siege to Jerusalem. Day 9, month 4, year 11, they can take it no more, and they attempt an escape, only to be caught. Zedekiah's men, they just abandon him. He's blinded. He's put into chains. They kill this guy's son in front of his face, and then they take his eyeballs out so that he cannot see anything else other than the murder of his kids. This is some cold-blooded stuff. Shortly after, every single thing in Jerusalem is burned down to the ground. Apparently in Babylon, they have a guy whose specific job is a destruction, razing cities down to the ground. This absolutely spectacular palace built for the name of Hashem is completely 100% destroyed, and anything that has any kind of value is carted off to Babylon. Clergy, governors, administrators, and regular people, all the priests, they're all taken to Babylon and they are summarily executed. The only people who are spared, these are the poor people. Likely the ones who the rich people of Judah, the lawmakers, spat on, is completely marginalized. These guys get to stay in the land. I think the irony is extraordinary. The year 597 BC, the kings and the throne of Israel ends in complete destruction, with the last king completely depending on a daily allowance. This life represents their complete freedom from the covenant of Hashem. But I don't believe it's better. The year is 560 BC. So these books of the Kings list the sequence and ascension and some notable facts surrounding each king's reign, the decisions that they made, and the results of those decisions. It details the events leading to the destruction of their nation. Now, the book of Chronicles covers this exact same sequence of kings, but its focus is on something else. However, the man with 700 wives and 300 concubines, he wrote a book. This book is titled The Song of Solomon, and it is considered highly volatile because of its explicit sexual content. I will read this book next, and I will read it entirely uncensored. Solomon also wrote a book called Ecclesiastes, and this book sort of ponders the question of the purpose of life. He wrote a book of Proverbs, which are wise sayings, thoughts of wisdom. It's not like a fortune cookie. We're going to read those three first, and then we're going to come back, go through the sequence of kings again, through the perspective of the author who wrote the book of Chronicles. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this. God bless you. The NQE is out.